Hello there and welcome to another episode of Off Track, Extreme E's official podcast. My name is James Baldwin and I'm joined by my friend and yours, Michael Laminato. G'day, mate.
Hello, mate. And yes, I'm excited. Not only are we back with another great podcast, probably, it's the start of the podcast, we'll see how it goes, but
yes,
we've got a race. This is race week, as they say on the internet.
It is what you can probably think is War Creek or Race Creek, as we well know the different variants said on the internet. But absolutely, if you're joining us after listening to our interview with Molly Taylor, welcome to our first pre-race podcast. We're very excited to be doing this ahead of the Arctic X Prix in Greenland, of course, and it starts today. As you listen to this podcast, the shakedown will be happening in a matter of hours, and of course, qualifying tomorrow on Saturday and the race on Sunday. But before we begin, I just wanted to say a big thank you to everyone who's listened in and written to us about our interview with Molly Taylor. Michael, there's plenty more good stuff to come, isn't there?
Yeah, there absolutely is. Some of it, the magic of podcasting, is already recorded, but others will be recorded at a more timely interval. But we've got plenty coming up over the course of the show. It's not only going to be about the races, of course, there's the people behind these races, the people that make this entire series tick. But for now, I'm excited for the Arctic X Prix. I was thinking today, it's even just exciting to think we're at the Arctic. How often in your life have you even thought about going there?
Well, as someone who lives in Australia, almost never.
Yeah.
Is the answer to your question.
Exactly.
Antarctic, maybe 3 or 4 times, probably in the entire time that I've been alive. But Arctic, no, never. And indeed, from what I'm aware of, this is the first motorsport event in Greenland. So there's plenty of firsts being achieved here. And of course, for people like Molly Taylor as well, definitely the first time she's probably been to the Arctic as well. But before we start talking about the Arctic too much, let's look back, shall we, on the races that have already happened. Of course, the Desert X Prix and the Ocean X Prix. What I thought we should do is maybe just pick 1 or 2 moments of our favourite little elements, I suppose, of both of these races. And aside from the excellent commentary from Jenny Gow and Andrew Coley, they do a great job. But my 2 favourite moments have to be Johan slingshotting around the outside to claim first in the Desert X Prix and just literally leaving everyone else in their dust. And Carla Dukes, this was unfortunate really because the Odyssey 21 turned itself off. I think it drove under a branch and the branch hit a kill switch. But anyway, he became a bush mechanic, literally on track in one of the qualifying sessions at the Ocean X Prix, and he managed to get it back going again. But he in that race was phenomenal. What about you, Michael? What are some of your favourite moments?
For me, and this really goes to what I love about this championship and will this week, I will continue to love this weekend as well, is the terrains we visited. And this comes down to, we're going to hear from him later on in the show, the man who's designing it, or in part designing it, Timo. The 2 favourite moments for me so far has just been the spectacle of the drop in Alula. Of course, what other racetrack in the world can you think of that has had something like that? And also the back end of the Senegal track, the ruts that were forming created such a challenge. It wasn't always spectacular for racing that part of the track, but as the terrain is changing over, of course, the last 2 rounds that we've seen, the next couple coming up, I think it's going to become more challenging. Looking at what's on the cards, the challenge of mastering the Odyssey on the terrain we're going to be facing has been my favourite part of seeing that, how the drivers have been coping with that challenge. And hopefully we're going to have more of that this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we know that Rosberg X Racing is currently leading the championship. So Molly and Johan have it to lose, really, going into this event. But as you say, Timo will be on a little bit later to talk about who he thinks might be taking it out. But interesting. Well, you can see the highlights packages for both of those races on the Extreme E website and on their YouTube channel. Links to those below. But we've got to have some news, don't we, Michael, before we get to Greenland? And we've got some driver updates. And someone else from our part of the world is joining the crew. Emma Gilmore is replacing Jamie Chadwick for Veloce Racing this weekend. And according to Teemo, she's already been out and about in the Odyssey 21 just to get a little bit familiar with the whole car situation.
This is going to be really interesting because it is relatively short notice, but she is from a rallying background, which is certainly going to help, of course, when you're jumping into the car like this. And I mean, to be changed into a situation where we've only got a couple of rounds left, we've only got 2 more rounds confirmed, 3 on the cards potentially in full. Every race here is going to be super important. I mean, every race in the championship is extremely important just by virtue of the number of rounds. But we're right in the halfway mark now. Every race is going to count to try and close that gap to Rosberg X Racing. So there is actually, it's a perverse kind of thing, isn't it? She's got to get used to it, but there's also a lot of pressure on her shoulders to perform right now, immediately. So how she performs is going to be really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, there is a degree of the unknown for everyone, right? The series is still new. People are still adjusting to the cars, whether or not they switch off randomly. That only happened once, but you never know. It's going to be in the back of everyone's heads now. It's in the back of my head when I drive. Not the Odyssey, just my regular car, obviously. No one would entrust me with an Odyssey. But there's going to be a lot of pressure to make sure that this driver change happens seamlessly.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we wish Emma all the best, of course, with that. And another driver bit of news, I suppose, is Kevin Hansen, who, of course, did an excellent job at the Ocean X Prix, taking over from Jenson Button, is now there full-time as the driver. If you've been watching any rallycross, you'll know that the Hansen brothers are dominating. There is Timmy and Kevin Hansen name trophies all over the place, probably at the family home now. But he is an incredible driver, really, really good to watch as well. And of course, it brings that little brother rivalry element to this sport as well. And look, I mean, Jenson, I think, is moving into that manager position now, which will probably suit him a little bit better. He can look to other one-time world championship Formula One winner Nico Rosberg and I don't know, throw a bit of ice or something in terms of some banter.
Yeah. How many people are going to try and get cold water down someone's shirt over the course of this weekend? Maybe that's just because I'm immature. It is interesting. I'm glad. I mean, of course, it's great to have Jenson Button involved in the championship. I think that after the first round, and look, he did great for a guy who his career is not in off-road racing. But I think that his skill set can be better deployed in the managerial role. I think he's really going to be great for that. And this has nothing to do with him getting out of the cockpit. This is purely just the form line, but first podium finish, of course, last time out. So something to build on there. I think there's a lot of potential in that team to have a settled lineup now because he's confirmed. Is a really great thing coming into the last couple of weeks.
Absolutely. Talk to us about Christina Gutierrez.
Really interesting story because I didn't expect her to be racing this weekend at all. She was at Rally Kazakhstan at the start of June or midway through June. So was that 6-7 weeks ago? Time moves very quickly these days. But she won that with a fractured spine, 2 fractured vertebrae. In fact, she didn't realize she'd done it during she knows she'd injured herself. You would probably know, fracturing vertebrae, that something was wrong. I mean, she didn't realize how serious it was, of course. Realized afterwards that it was serious, a really long rehabilitation process. But she's here. She's going to race, which is, I mean, an incredible turnaround. It really shows you, for anyone who ever doubts the drivers, riders, whatever, athletes, this is yet another argument to put that out of your mind. An incredible recovery, incredible determination. She says she'll probably be fine. I'll take probably. That's more than enough. But that's really great, of course, because we're talking about a title contender here. Great for her, of course, great for the team, and of course, great for X44 because there is a points gap now. We're looking, 14 points, something like that. Can be closed, of course, but you don't want that to get any wider if you really want to pressure for this championship. We know Rosberg X Racing is a very solid unit. So good news all round, and obviously great that she's fit and healthy and ready to race.
I completely agree. I'm looking forward to seeing how quick that X44 car is only in a couple of days' time. And of course, Abt Cooper Racing as well. Talk to us about that. That was back in June, wasn't it? But that's confirmed.
Yeah, it's confirmed that Julia Kleinschmidt will be taking over the reins there permanently. She, of course, came in pretty late notice into Senegal, and she did really well, but of course resulted in one penalty during the driver switch in in the semi-final, I think, wasn't it? Resulted in a penalty, but was very quick. Is a well-accomplished racing driver. We shouldn't be surprised about that. So it's it's boost to the. Well, I shouldn't say boost, should I? Make an edit there because we don't want to say who's leaving is no good. It's great So it's great to have her as part of the series. It's great for that team as well. And again, I think settled lineups are going to count going forward because there have been various reasons for lineups to change. We know drivers involved in the sport, in off-roading in general, but in all forms of motorsport really do have other commitments. I like that we're moving back into a motorsport phase where we are seeing drivers do more than one series or one category at a time. It does mean clashes are inevitable. But I do think that having a settled lineup, and again, to talk about the champions or all the leading teams really, having that settled lineup is going to be really key to trying to grind out this title win.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, lastly, Andretti United, of course, has renewed Katie Munnings and Timmy Hansen for 2022. I suppose we're at that part of the season already where the driver market is heating up or cooling down, depending on which part of the world that we're in, of course. But of course, the
leaves are coming off the driver market. Is that the analogy we're going for? I don't know.
Look, potentially. But of course, the other bit of news that was announced by McLaren is that Tanner Faust, it will be one half of their team for next year. McLaren, of course, confirming their entry into Extreme E for the 2022 season only a couple of months ago. That's a big news really for the sport, isn't it? And also for, I suppose, how seriously the rest of the motorsport community can take this series.
Well, I think that's right. It's serious not only in terms of the seriousness of this series. Hard to say serious and series in one sentence, isn't it? But the McLaren entry, the seriousness of the McLaren entry. We should never, not that we should ever have doubted McLaren's seriousness here, but we know that McLaren has a growing motorsport portfolio, if you like. And they've even got a couple more on the burner as potential entries in other categories in the future. But there's clearly no doubt that Extreme E's been chosen by McLaren and they're going to take this extremely, to use the word, yes, seriously. They're going to throw everything into it. They still have to announce their second driver, and so all eyes will absolutely be on the second seat there, but I can't wait to see how that team performs next year. I mean, we know it's a very close championship in general. Having the additional here is going to be really interesting.
And of course, Tanner coming from a broadcasting background as well as being exceptionally talented and well-regarded in a rally car and a race car, it's just going to be very, very good to watch. As I spoke to someone the other day about this series for the first time, and they were like, oh, it's just bonkers. What these guys do is just bonkers. And to be honest, I couldn't put it any better myself if I tried. The other thing that we should talk about is they have announced a rookie invitational. So each team will be able to test two drivers after the Prix in Sardinia, which is at the end of October. I was popping through the comment section as I like to do on Extreme E's posts. And on Instagram, there was an overwhelming desire to see Kimi Räikkönen. Well, look, Fernando Alonso was a rookie last year. So, look.
Yeah. Yes. We really got to stretch the definition of a rookie, I guess, to get Kimi Räikkönen in there. But I mean, I'd be willing to stretch that definition. There's a great sign every time I'd get to the Hungarian Grand Prix. There's a bridge on the motorway that takes you there. And literally every year without fail, I think it's been going for as long as Raikkonen's been racing in Formula One. There's just a sign that says Kimi for president. It might even belong to the bridge. So if he can be the president of an unknown country, I don't know if they meant Hungary or another country, why can't he also be a rookie? I mean,
he can be a rookie president. He can do both at the same time. Yes, he absolutely would be.
Wouldn't he? Yes.
But look, plenty in there. If you have someone who you would like to see jump into any of the seats, I suppose, any of your teams, jump onto Extreme E's Instagram and comment who you think, because they are open for ideas. And of course, some drivers might not even know that this is a possibility. So find out their Instagram handle, tag them on Twitter as well, all of that stuff. Again, you'll find the links to all of those things below. Well, I think it's probably about time we talk to someone who knows a little bit more about the Greenland track than really anyone, apart from a handful of people. And that is, of course, Timo Scheider. And Timo was there a couple of months ago. He renewed his track walk, I suppose, and got himself familiar again with the ups and downs and his whole thoughts about what we might expect this weekend. Timo, thank you for your time ahead of the Arctic Prix in Greenland. You're there, of course, on the track. What are your first impressions, I suppose, of the track this week?
Well, actually, I was also a bit surprised that I was so excited when I was coming out of the car, because I knew the track roughly already from June when we have done the recce. But driving it yesterday in the Odyssey 21 was somehow super cool and super fun. Not somehow, it was like what I expected, but the fun factor was somehow really back. So the first and second sector are quite selective, like a lot of sand, some jumps and stuff. And the bottom part, let's say sector 2 and 3, are so different, like soft gravel, and then you have like harder sand, and then you have like big rocks, like the rock garden we call it. This is something which is different challenges on one lap. So I'm really excited about what the drivers are saying.
What's going to be the biggest challenge, do you think, for the drivers on the track this weekend?
You know, we have pretty difficult colors from the riverbed. That means like it looks all flat basically when you just go and you see like the next gate is like far away and it looks like super easy, super flat. But then you realize as soon as you drive over it, you realize, oh no, there are dips and drops and like huge ones, like 2 meters, 1 meter, half a meter, and you have to read the road quite sensible. I think we will see cars jumping around quite a lot, so they should pay attention not to overdrive it. I think there's quite a high risk of rolling it.
Timo, there's a wet weather forecast for the Prix this weekend, which means dust will be low. And of course, compared to the last two races, that changes things pretty significantly. What do you think's really going to affect the drivers compared to those two previous races?
Well, so far, the drivers I've seen, they have been hiding in corners in their tents because it's already now quite cold. But if there's rain coming, for sure, this is giving an extra topic on the event. But I don't know what to expect when it's proper raining. But I think from the forecast we see, it's just some drizzling. It's not like going wild. But I think this will be a different race to everything else we've had before so far. But I'm pretty sure this one will be remembered. I'm quite sure.
X44 has been fastest in both qualifyings so far this year, and of course Rosberg X Racing has won both races. They dominated the finals, really. Who do you think will have an advantage this weekend?
Somehow I still hoping for a bit, not hoping. Yeah, I think it's would be time to see the Ganassi guys on top, because Kyle and Sarah, they are really flying sometimes, but they don't bring it to the end. That's the problem. So I think in terms of speed, they would deserve a victory. This could be one of the tracks where Kyle is probably like killing everyone with his high risk he takes. But also the high risk means like a lot of risk to lose it. But rather than this, for sure, it's the Rosberg team, it's the Cupra team, it's for sure those guys. And let's see. Maybe we see a surprise. Also like Kevin Hansen again. They've been a surprise in Senegal, but I think mainly we should aim for the guys like we know, like Christopherson and Molly, and for sure Sebastian will be there. He's clever enough to bring it to the end.
Is there a driver that you think this track might complement specifically? The flat-out racer, the tactician? What do you think?
The guys are just allowed to walk the track this time. So this is something which is a bit more tricky to analyze before you go out there in the car. That means you can't feel the bumps and the crests we have. When you drive it by like a buggy or a car beforehand, then you have a slight feeling of what to expect. But like this is completely different. They will walk 9 kilometers track in like, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours, and they have to remember and to cover all this track by pictures and GoPro footage I guess they will record. So I think the first sector is it's in a way difficult because we have some rough bumps, but after this, some single trail where they will probably lined up for a while. They will jump up and down, super nice, to the riverbed down. But then I think the difference is made in the second and third sector. So yeah, let's see. I'm still wondering what it will be.
And Timo, what have you been up to this week in Greenland? Not only as the track designer, but of course also as the series Joker driver.
Well, in June for sure, I've done the first draw of the lap, and right now, since I'm here, I was testing the Odyssey 21 for the first time in race conditions. So we go out there, we check out the battery level status after 2 laps, and the power level and temperature and everything which has to be sorted before Spark is giving the advice or the power level to the teams. We have to be sure what we can deliver to the teams, or Spark's delivering to the teams, to finish the lap as well. So we have to somehow come to the finish line. So that's for the testing is quite important. And then we had just now Emma Gilmore coming up here and doing a rollout because she's new to the championship. So I be there and not coaching, but be ready for questions in that case. Also, we had some locals here today from town. We showed them around, and it was a pleasure to have them here. So they welcomed us here quite well, and we did the same. So we showed them around in the car and explained this and that. Yeah, this is my day so far today and yesterday. And right now I'm getting hungry. So it's time for dinner.
The drivers are about to have their track walk for the first time. Can you talk us through their next few days?
Well, all drivers now coming back tomorrow from the ship from St. Helena, and for sure they're trying to catch as many informations already now before they do the track walk. But the track walk for sure is the most important start for those guys and teams to collect all the informations. After this is a lot of drivers and engineers meetings coming up for sure to analyze what they've just seen on track, to prepare themselves and the car for the rollout. The rollout is not too difficult for those guys. They just check the car if it's doing well after it came back from the container, and then when they start the practice sessions, for sure this is the first thing which is super important, to be sensible, to record everything. They will have the cameras in the car to record this as well, and then it's analyzing and comparing, and this is what all the weekend through engineers and drivers are doing. Just try to analyze every single data you can get just to be as quick as possible.
Thanks very much, Timo. That's Timo, the Joker driver and track designer, part of the track design team, working not only on the series as a whole, but of course this weekend's Arctic X Prix. I'm excited to see how the drivers go around this track this weekend, and he'll be back, in fact, if you want to know more about Timo, in the podcast in the next few weeks. A full interview, full length, full fat interview, absolutely unadulterated. Wow, there was some censoring involved, actually. I can't say absolutely unadulterated. I can't wait to share it with you, though. It's going to be good.
There's a couple of people who I will share the uncensored bit with, and that is it. But certainly a fantastic interview. And if you don't know much about Timo, then it's well worth a listen. Incredibly lovely guy with a great story to tell. All right, Michael. Well, that's the track preview. Let's talk about the weekend preview, because we've got some changes in the way that Extreme E is running the qualifying and the races this weekend. Can you talk us through those?
Yeah, so we've got a bit of a format tweak, which I think is really going to make it really put a lot of emphasis on the final. I mean, the final in Senegal, for example, really delivered. We got some great racing. I mean, in fact, we got great racing in every session in Senegal, but this is hopefully going to deliver us a little bit of a twist on the action when we get to the final. The idea is we're going to have 5 cars in the final now. So we're going to have a 5-car race, which is more than half the grid. It's pretty good. Can't argue with that. Qualifying format has resultantly changed a little bit. Now, instead of it being on aggregate times, essentially we're now going to award points for the 2 runs of qualifying. Fastest time in each qualifying run, you're going to get points, not championship points, just points in terms of rankings. This means that if you have a real shocker of a qualifying in the first or second run, you're not going to be completely out of the thing, because you're not going to have to make up that time. It's just going to be on these aggregate points. Then we're going to divide up the cars, similar format to what we know, 1st, 5th, and 6th in the semi-final 1. We're going to get 2 winners going into the final, or the top 2 cars going to the final. Semi-final 2 will be places 2, 3, and 4 after qualifying. The top 2 again going to the final. Then we have the return of the crazy race. Just the return of the name of the crazy race is very exciting on its own. But that's 7th, 8th, and 9th in the shootout situation. Only the number 1 car in that will go to the final. That makes 5, if my maths have served me correctly. And then, of course, we'll get the points-paying final, and the other cars that will have been eliminated will finish in the bottom couple of places for the weekend. So a slight tweak means we're going to have more cars in the final, which I think is really exciting, because some might have been skeptical that this format of racing was going to work before this championship happened. Off-road racing, there's a good reason there's not heaps of that. There's a good reason that it's rallycross is sort of a bit of a mixture. But I think it's fair to say, on the evidence of what we've seen so far, is that absolutely the cars, the drivers, and the tracks are up to it. So I'm really excited to see 5 cars on the track. I mean, it can only be great. Surely it can only be great.
Yes. Well,
is that too much excitement?
Not at all. I mean, this is look, as we have said offline, it's such a great opportunity. This is a motorsport that has the ability to do the tweaks in its first season. And, for whatever reason, some people will say, oh, no, it's not for me or whatever. But seriously, this weekend is definitely going to be worth watching. And especially as we just heard from Timo before, because the conditions are different, because there's areas in the track that he's chosen that means that you can potentially get maybe not 5 cars wide, because that would be about 70 meters.
Probably pushing it, isn't it?
In terms of how big
that's
these
called
cars
a highway,
are.
isn't
yes,
it?
It is. Yes, it is. But it certainly will it really shine out really the people who know how to do wheel-to-wheel racing, because where there's all kinds of different drivers in this category, as we've said before, and just because they might not be so fast potentially off-road, they know how to do wheel-to-wheel racing. So yeah, I'm really excited to see how that plays out. And look, Michael, I think you did a very good job at discussing that whole thing. I had to use a graphic on an Instagram post for me to understand it, and if you need that too, again,
look, some people are visual learners. That's
as many
fine.
pictures as possible. I'm there.
Yeah.
Send help otherwise. But in terms of what we think is going to happen this weekend, because this is what I think, we have really no idea apart from being able to have a couple of insights, I suppose, from some of the teams. But really, I'm very excited to look. I think obviously we're Australian. Molly Taylor's going to win. So apart from Molly winning, what would we like to see? Well, look, I think Chip Ganassi Racing really deserves a victory this weekend. Just like Timo said, they have had phenomenal pace. Every single X-Prix and something has just gone wrong for them, either in the race or in qualifying. Kyle is a phenomenal driver. His speed is ridiculous. And Sarah Price as well, who will probably be on the podcast as well as a full interview in a couple of weeks' time as well. Again, a very, very fast driver. So that's my pick, aside from, of course, as I said, Molly Taylor for the weekend. Michael, who do you think?
It's too easy to just say Rosberg X Racing. I mean, it's cheating to tip them. Not tip them, but make a prediction or whatever you want to say. Look, I do think that it's been easy after a couple of races, not to discount, but to forget about some of the teams that haven't scored heavily, because a lot of them, like you say, have just kind of suffered some poor luck, some weird circumstance. We've seen crashes and all sorts, really. But I do think that we probably, one of all of those teams, I'm going to pick one of them that's probably due for a good score. Ab's got the lineup to do it as well. Everyone really does have the lineup to do it, but I think there's a lot here between Matthias Ekstrom. Of course, everyone knows his credentials in all forms of racing, really. But Jutta Kleinschmidt, we've talked about her already a little bit, jumped in Senegal, did really well, is now confirmed permanently. But you just can't discount, I think, the experience of being a Dakar winner.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just too big a fan of the Dakar.
No such thing.
And I know this is also technically, I think so.
Thank you.
Right? I know this is also technically not Dakar terrain. We already had that. We were in Saudi Arabia at the start of the year. But I just think that lineup is ready to score big.
Yes.
And I know that it's all very close, and the format we've got now means there are 5 cars that could ultimately win this thing now. But I think they're ready to really deliver. They have already got a podium finish, or they podium qualifying finish, I should say, in the top 3 last time out, wasn't it? But I think there's a lot of potential there. And so I'm going to say, instead of Rosberg X Racing to absolutely sweep it after 3, I reckon we've got some potential there.
Might surprise a lot of people that we have chosen other teams apart from the default Australian option. Well, there it is. Now, of course, in our last podcast, we heard from Dr. Carlos Duarte, who spoke to us about, of course, the issues surrounding the Arctic X-Prix. And he's back, which is fantastic. He's on the ground. We will actually get to see some physical Carlos Duarte on the ground. Can you talk to us what's happening in Greenland with him?
Yeah. Yes, he's there. He'll be physically there.
Is he on the ground? Yeah, just asking for a friend.
He may, he would have been on the sea if he were on the boat earlier. So I guess he's an all-terrain kind of guy. He is going to be on the ground with a couple of other of the Extreme E Science team, of course. And some news as well. You can check it out on the Extreme E website, and we'll talk about this in the next couple of weeks' podcast. But the science activity, for example, on the St. Helena, the ship that's getting the whole show around, really is really kicking off now. There's some progress there. So the science element of this is really starting to come to the fore now. The series is ticking over. But Carlos Duarte will be on the ground. I say that importantly because we've, of course, heard from him in the last podcast, and we've got a couple more clips from him. We had a long chat about, of course, climate change, and in particular why Greenland is really at the heart of it, why it's sort of the front line, if you like, of some of the changes we're seeing around the world. We had a chat with him about all of that kind of stuff, and that's going to be, of course, the theme of this weekend, because we already have seen in the lead up to this race, completely by coincidence, a terrible coincidence, but in some respects a convenient coincidence for the purpose of this fact file, which is that we've seen rain for the first time at the highest point in Greenland, sustained rain, which is extremely unusual because it shouldn't be warm enough for rain. That kind of tells you everything you need to know about how serious this situation is. They've had the most rain, in fact, across all of Greenland since records began in 1950, which is long enough ago that it should be concerning. You can't just say, well, the records only go to 1950. No, it's important that you recognize that's bad. Unprecedented. It's enough to say it's unprecedented. And this is very much Carlos's field. He's an ocean scientist, and Greenland is very much interacting with climate change in the ocean sphere, right? It's all about ocean warming, the rising sea levels. Obviously, when ice melts, it turns into water. I don't need to explain it in any more detail than that. He'll do a much better job of it than I will, trust me. And so it'll be really interesting to see what he says when he's there, and how he explains some of these elements as that part of the spectacle.
Well, before we hear from him after the Arctic X Prix, let's hear him discuss a little bit more about the importance of Greenland and the Arctic.
I want to take you back to the legacy program as well, because that is, I guess, a little bit separate from the sport. There are all those good reasons the sport can do good, as you've just explained. The legacy program is almost, it's a really hands-on example of things we can do, I suppose, right? It's places we go as a sport and make some meaningful hands-on change. How valuable is that part of the work Extreme E is doing? Is it good that it, not only is it about the messaging as we've talked about, but is demonstrating that there is something people can do on an individual level, I suppose?
Yes, absolutely. That I believe that the legacy program is a key differentiator between Extreme E and many other initiatives to drive awareness and take action on climate change, because it goes all the way from the global perspective to place-based action. And we are seeing this through the various legacy programs that are being rolled. So in Saudi Arabia, the legacy program of Extreme E is helping sea turtles secure a future under climate change, because with the rising sea levels and warming temperatures, sea turtles are under threat. And the program there is now improving the conservation status of sea turtles and help the animals to cope with climate change. In Senegal, then we saw the legacy program restoring mangroves, which are incredibly efficient carbon sinks, and working with local communities to do that, because it does not only contribute to removing carbon, but also improves livelihoods for locals, because it protects their shorelines from sea level rise and also enhances the fishery resources of Senegal. So there's always a very strong commitment of local communities and a contribution of local communities to the legacy program. In Greenland, where Extreme E will be racing soon, then the legacy program is working with UNICEF to increase climate awareness among children in Greenland. So you can see a very broad slate of activities, but there is actually a common denominator to all of the local legacy programs, which is a global perspective. So the global goals are to decarbonize transport, so both motor vehicles that run on land and also vessels. So there's an electrification challenge that is being driven globally by Extreme E. And one of the reasons why I learned that motorsports is such a huge catalyzer for change is that a lot of technology that eventually cascades into our daily lives is actually delivered through motorsports. So many advances in technologies that eventually are part of our daily lives actually come to exist through motorsports. So we are seeing also pathways to also meet other challenges like the demand for metals and rare earths that come with electrification. So batteries are very demanding of metals, and now the search for metals is actually creating difficulties for biodiversity and conservation. So we're seeing within Extreme also efforts to try to think outside the box and create new models for batteries that are not so hungry for metals. So decarbonizing sectors, the transport system, electrification, reducing the demand for metals for a more sustainable future. We also work on fuels. So fuels that fuel motor vehicles, but also fuel people. So we're working on sustainable food and sustainable water as well, because motorsports, they gather huge crowds. So we also are making sure that the food and water that is supplied to the crowds that gather around motorsports are actually sourced in a sustainable manner that helps with climate change and helps with the environment rather than create additional problems. Awareness is fundamentally important, and education and also leadership. So in Extreme globally, there is a desire to help nurture a new generation of champions, but champions that will not only win races with motor vehicles, but will also help us win the race of our time, which is the race for a sustainable future.
Interestingly, and you just said it then, that really what we're on is a race to win the climate challenge, and ultimately being aware of that and operating in a balanced way with nature helps deliver not only a healthier planet, but a healthier society. Is there something that you would like to say to those people who previously haven't thought a lot about the issues of climate change and sustainability?
Well, somehow I find that the fact that your individual positioning on climate change somehow has political connotations is a main obstacle for us to gather our own contributions and deliver them to climate action and a sustainable future. So I think that what we need to think about is on the opportunities rather than the challenges. And the opportunities are that if we are able to work together to generate a more sustainable future, that will in itself be probably the largest economic opportunity since the Industrial Revolution. And in fact, I believe that where we are transitioning now is from a state of fear and concern, and if you wish, disbelief on climate change and many of our planetary challenges, to now viewing those as an opportunity to build a new economy that creates wealth and creates jobs and well-paid jobs, but they do so in improving our planet. So in my vision and what I'm seeing that starts to emerge in my interaction with Extreme, for instance, is I start to envision a fourth industrial revolution where the wealth and economic opportunity is actually about repairing our planet, not about continuing to harm our planet. And I believe all of us, regardless of our belief sets or political stance, will agree that a healthy planet is a much better prospect for ourselves and for our children. And if that comes along with economic opportunities and opportunities to create wealth and jobs, then I think there's really no divider anymore among society, and all of us should embrace that challenge that comes with huge opportunities.
Certainly hope that's the way the discussion moves. I want to take you to Greenland now, the challenge in Extreme's immediate future. We often talk about climate change, certainly in Australia, about things like fires, there are droughts, floods, all these kind of, let's say, land-based problems. But less spoken about are, of course, the ocean. 70% of the Earth's surface is ocean. What effects is climate change having on our seas, and why are they something we should really be thinking more about?
Well, so Australia and Greenland are actually two very large islands. So there's some commonalities between the two. And there's actually some links between the two, some surprising links that we can discuss later. But in terms of climate change for island territories, even if they are very large islands, then obviously the shoreline, the coastal areas are very, very important for Greenland and Australia. And therefore, sea level rise is a main element of consideration. And it plays very differently in Greenland compared to Australia, because Australia has a very shallow relief and is actually under a threat from sea level rise in terms of flooding to major cities like Melbourne, Sydney, and most of the big metropolis in Australia are actually located in very low-lying grounds, like even Brisbane, and they are actually very vulnerable to sea level rise. In contrast, Greenland is a very abrupt island with a very abrupt terrain, so sea level rise is not really a main challenge for Greenlanders, but it actually is sourced and rooted in Greenland, because Greenland has a large ice cap that occupies about 70% of the island. And that ice cap is about 1 kilometer thick at places and almost 1 million years old at places. In overall, it's about 100,000 years old, but it contains enough ice to raise the sea level globally by 7 meters if all that ice was to be melted. And in fact, the bad news is that we've already destabilized through pumping excess greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. We've already stabilized the ice sheet in Greenland. So the ice sheet is starting to melt, is contributing more and more fresh water to the ocean. And by now, about 1/3 of current sea level is actually fed by water that is melted from the Greenland ice cap. So that is a lever of change that affects us all, because regardless of where you are in latitude or hemisphere, sea level rises reaches us all across the world. So that is a very important element why Greenland is an important and special place. But also along the shores of the eastern shore of Greenland, there's a current which is called the Eastern Greenland Current, that drives water out of the Arctic into the Atlantic. And that water eventually sinks because it's very cold and therefore dense somewhere in the North Atlantic. And that sinking of water sets in motion the main current systems of the ocean that redistribute heat between the tropics and the higher latitudes. So we're seeing that with the high delivery of fresh water to the Arctic from the Greenland ice sheet, but also from rivers in Siberia and other places, the Arctic is becoming fresher. And because fresh water is less dense and floats above seawater, then there's a concern that that sinking of water south of Greenland that is so important for steady in motion currents that regulate regional climates might be distorted and might be slowed down. So we can see very anomalous climates in some regions, so very hot temperatures in the tropics, extreme cold temperatures in the north. And we're seeing really a crazy weather system this year with temperatures of 50 degrees in the North American Pacific, which are really unprecedented by a factor of 10 degrees. So this role of Greenland as a global regulator of climate and sea level rise makes Greenland an ideal place to go for extremely and raise awareness about the importance of that little island, which has only about 55,000 people, and yet it plays a very significant role in controlling the global climate and the global dynamics of the oceans.
That was Professor Carlos Duarte explaining a little bit more about Greenland. We'll hear a little bit more from him after the race as well, to sort of wrap up some of the things we've learned from our expedition to Greenland, other than it being cold, and the winner, obviously. There will be a winner, and they'll be deserving of
the winner is
victory,
awareness, isn't it? Really doesn't matter who wins.
Yeah, winner.
The winner
all
is all of us.
Yeah.
We will all get third place bronze medals straight from Michael Lemonardo to you. No, very good chat. And we'll finish that off with Carlos in our post-race interview a distinguished professor. What an absolute legend of a distinguished professor too. You can also find a bit of video footage of him.
The best distinguished
I
professor.
know, yes, and I only know one, so it's surprising. But in terms of what he's been doing to date, again, you can jump on Extreme E's Instagram page and see them collecting some samples. In fact, all of the drivers, I think, collected some samples of soot and all that sort of other stuff in the water to know just what you can tell through all of that. It blows my mind, absolutely blows it.
I've always, another thing I've always wanted to do, talking about how at the start you imagine ever going to the Arctic, take an ice core sample.
Yes.
Seems very cool.
Yes.
If you could do it. I wouldn't know what
Apparently,
to do with
it was a couple of years ago, it was done, it was like 3.5 kilometers deep core sample was collected from this place.
Impressive.
Yeah, and I think they found the birthplace of Kimi Räikkönen. Maybe of his original
He'll
Presidente style stuff. Well, that's it for the pre-race podcast. Be sure to subscribe and like, of course, this podcast where you can. If you have enjoyed Michael and I, please leave a review as well and a rating. It helps significantly. You can find places to follow Michael and myself in the description, links below in the show notes, or if you're watching on YouTube as well. Heaps of really good content coming out at the moment with Extreme E. Lots of good stuff, including this podcast. So make sure you're on their socials as well. Check out their website and all of that good stuff. Michael, what else have we got to say?
Look, I can't wait to see how this weekend is going to unfold. It's as simple as that. I think the terrain's really interesting. I know I've talked about that a lot. The circuit looks great. And of course, we are really getting towards, going to arrive before you know it, the business end of this championship. Every race counts in a five-round championship, but when you're in round 3, you're past halfway. I can do the math. I can do that simple.
Well done.
Maths.
Yes, good for you.
So this is going to be really crucial stuff. There's no more time to get used to it. It's all business from here.
If you've got any ideas for the podcast, I'd love to hear from you. podcast@extreme-e.com is where you can reach us. Again, that'll be in the description below. But we can't wait to chat with you in a few days' time as we find out who the winner is. It's probably going to be Molly Taylor and Johan Kristoffersen, let's be honest, from the Arctic X Prix. Michael, looking forward to chatting to you then.
Can't wait. Chat then.